Traveling the world has long been a cherished way to broaden horizons, experience new cultures, and create lifelong memories. But as we look ahead to 2025, the landscape of global travel is shifting dramatically for American citizens. Due to rising diplomatic tensions, safety concerns, and evolving visa policies, a growing number of countries are closing their doors to U.S. travelers. In this video, we'll explore 15 destinations that Americans will no longer be able to visit in 2025. From geopolitical conflicts to health and security risks, we'll uncover the reasons behind these bans and what they mean for the future of international travel. Some of these countries might shock you, so stay tuned until the end. And before we get started, don't forget to hit that subscribe button like this video and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest content. Let's dive in.
Sir, no, sir.
At number 15, we have North Korea, a country that has long been one of the most isolated and restrictive nations in the world. For decades, North Korea has maintained a tense relationship with the United States, primarily due to political differences, nuclear tensions, and human rights concerns. As of 2025, Americans are still not welcome in North Korea. In fact, travel to the country is heavily restricted. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, which means do not travel. This is due to the serious risk of arrest, detention, and even long-term imprisonment for American citizens. The case of Otto Warmbier, a U.S. student who was detained in North Korea and later died after being released in a coma, remains a chilling reminder of the dangers Americans face in the country. Additionally, the lack of diplomatic relations between the two nations makes it nearly impossible for the U.S. government to provide consular assistance to its citizens in North Korea. For Americans, visiting North Korea is not just discouraged, it's practically off the table. The country's strict control over information, its surveillance of foreigners, and its unpredictable political climate make it one of the most unwelcoming places for U.S. travelers in 2025. Coming in at number 14 is Iran, a country with a complex and often strained relationship with the United States. The tensions between these two nations date back decades, with key moments like the 1979 Iranian Revolution and the subsequent hostage crisis at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, leaving a lasting impact. In 2025, Americans are still not welcome in Iran. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, warning against all travel to the country. The risks for American citizens include arbitrary arrest, detention, and espionage charges. Dual nationals in particular are at high risk of being targeted. Even if you manage to obtain a visa, which is incredibly difficult for Americans, traveling to Iran comes with significant challenges. U.S. passports are closely scrutinized, and Americans are often required to be accompanied by a government-approved guide at all times. This level of surveillance and restriction makes it nearly impossible for Americans to experience Iran freely. Moreover, the ongoing political tensions, including disputes over nuclear programs and regional conflicts, continue to fuel hostility between the two nations. For Americans, Iran remains a destination that's best avoided in 2025. At number 13, we have Syria, a country that has been embroiled in a devastating civil war since 2011. The conflict has not only destroyed much of the nation's infrastructure, but has also created a highly volatile and dangerous environment for foreigners, especially Americans. In 2025, Syria remains one of the most unwelcoming countries for U.S. citizens. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, strongly advising against any travel to Syria. The risks include kidnapping, arbitrary detention, and violence from both government forces and opposition groups. The ongoing conflict has led to a breakdown in diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Syria, making it nearly impossible for Americans to receive consular assistance if they find themselves in trouble. Additionally, the presence of terrorist organizations and the lack of effective law enforcement further exacerbate the dangers. Even for those who might be drawn to Syria for humanitarian work or journalism, the risks far outweigh any potential rewards. The country's unstable political climate and the high likelihood of violence make it a no-go zone for Americans in 2025. Next up, at number 12, is Yemen, a country that has been torn apart by years of civil war, political instability, and humanitarian crises. The ongoing conflict between Houthi rebels and the internationally recognized government, backed by a Saudi-led coalition, has created a highly dangerous environment for everyone, including foreigners. In 2025, Yemen remains one of the most unwelcoming countries for Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, warning against all travel to Yemen. The risks for Americans include kidnapping, terrorism, and violent crime. The country is also grappling with severe shortages of food, water, and medical supplies, making it an extremely challenging place to visit. The U.S. Embassy in Yemen has been closed since 2015, which means there is no consular assistance available for American citizens in the country. This lack of diplomatic presence, combined with the ongoing conflict and the presence of extremist groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, makes Yemen a high-risk destination. For Americans, traveling to Yemen is not only discouraged but also highly impractical. The country's instability and the constant threat of violence make it one of the most unwelcoming places for U.S. citizens in 2025. At number 11, we have Afghanistan, a country that has faced decades of conflict, political instability, and foreign intervention. Since the U.S. withdrawal in 2021 and the Taliban's return to power, the situation in Afghanistan has become increasingly precarious, especially for Americans. In 2025, Afghanistan remains one of the most unwelcoming countries for U.S. citizens. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, strongly advising against all travel to the country. The risks for Americans include terrorism, kidnapping, and arbitrary detention. The Taliban's strict interpretation of Islamic law and their hostility toward the U.S. make it particularly dangerous for Americans to visit. The U.S. Embassy in Kabul has suspended operations, leaving no consular assistance available for American citizens in Afghanistan. This lack of diplomatic support, combined with the country's ongoing humanitarian crisis and the presence of extremist groups like ISIS-K, makes Afghanistan a high-risk destination. Even for those with personal or professional reasons to visit, the dangers far outweigh any potential benefits. For Americans, Afghanistan remains a country to avoid in 2025. Coming in at number 10 is Venezuela, a country that has been grappling with political turmoil, economic collapse, and social unrest for years. The strained relationship between the U.S. and Venezuela, fueled by sanctions and political disagreements, has made it a challenging destination for Americans. In 2025, Venezuela remains unwelcoming to U.S. citizens. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, warning against all travel to the country. The risks for Americans include crime, civil unrest, and arbitrary detention. The economic crisis has led to widespread shortages of food, medicine, and basic necessities, making travel extremely difficult. Political tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela have also resulted in the suspension of most diplomatic operations, leaving little to no consular assistance available for Americans in the country. Additionally, the presence of armed groups and the high crime rate in major cities like Caracas further increase the risks for travelers. For Americans, visiting Venezuela is not only discouraged, but also highly risky. The combination of political instability, economic hardship, and safety concerns makes it one of the most unwelcoming countries for U.S. citizens in 2025. At number 9, we have Libya, a country that has been in a state of chaos since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The ongoing civil war, political fragmentation, and presence of armed militias have made Libya one of the most dangerous places in the world, especially for foreigners. In 2025, Libya remains unwelcoming to Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, strongly advising against all travel to the country. The risks for Americans include kidnapping, terrorism, and violent crime. The lack of a centralized government and the presence of extremist groups like ISIS further exacerbate the dangers. The U.S. Embassy in Tripoli has been closed since 2014, leaving no consular assistance available for American citizens in Libya. This lack of diplomatic support, combined with the country's lawlessness and ongoing conflict, makes Libya a high-risk destination. Even for those with professional reasons to visit, such as journalists or humanitarian workers, the risks are immense. For Americans, Libya remains a country to avoid in 2025. At number 8, we have Somalia, a country that has been plagued by decades of civil war, political instability, and terrorism. The ongoing conflict between the federal government, regional states, and extremist groups like Al-Shabaab has created a highly dangerous environment for everyone, including foreigners. In 2025, Somalia remains one of the most unwelcoming countries for Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, warning against all travel to the country. The risks for Americans include kidnapping, terrorism, and violent crime. The lack of effective law enforcement and the presence of armed groups make it particularly dangerous for U.S. citizens. The U.S. Embassy in Mogadishu operates on a limited basis, providing minimal consular assistance to American citizens. This lack of diplomatic support, combined with the country's ongoing conflict and humanitarian crisis, makes Somalia a high-risk destination. Even for those with professional reasons to visit, such as journalists or aid workers, the risks far outweigh any potential benefits. For Americans, Somalia remains a country to avoid in 2025. Coming in at number 7 is Iraq, a country that has faced significant challenges since the US-led invasion in 2003. Despite efforts to stabilize the nation, Iraq continues to grapple with political instability, sectarian violence, and the presence of extremist groups. In 2025, Iraq remains unwelcoming to Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, warning against all travel to the country. The risks for Americans include terrorism, kidnapping, and violent crime. While some regions, like the Kurdistan Autonomous Region, are relatively safer, much of the country remains highly unstable. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad operates under strict security measures, and consular assistance for American citizens is limited. The presence of armed groups and the ongoing threat of attacks make Iraq a high-risk destination for travelers. Even for those with professional or personal reasons to visit, the dangers are significant. For Americans, Iraq remains a country to approach with extreme caution in 2025. At number 6, we have Sudan, a country that has experienced significant political upheaval in recent years. The ousting of longtime leader Omar al-Bashir in 2019 led to a fragile transitional government, but the country continues to face challenges, including economic instability, civil unrest, and ongoing conflicts in regions like Darfur. In 2025, Sudan remains unwelcoming to Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, warning against all travel to the country. The risks for Americans include crime, civil unrest, and the potential for violent demonstrations. The lack of infrastructure and the presence of armed groups further increase the dangers for travelers. The U.S. Embassy in Khartoum operates on a limited basis, providing minimal consular assistance to American citizens. This lack of diplomatic support, combined with the country's ongoing instability, makes Sudan a high-risk destination. Even for those with professional reasons to visit, such as journalists or aid workers, the risks are significant. For Americans, Sudan remains a country to avoid in 2025. At number 5, we have Pakistan, a country with a complex relationship with the United States. While the two nations have been allies in the past, particularly in the fight against terrorism, tensions have risen due to political disagreements, drone strikes, and concerns over Pakistan's ties to militant groups. In 2025, Pakistan remains a challenging destination for Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 3 travel advisory, urging Americans to reconsider travel to the country. The risks for U.S. citizens include terrorism, kidnapping, and sectarian violence. Certain regions, particularly near the Afghan border, are considered extremely dangerous and are off-limits to foreigners. While major cities like Islamabad and Lahore are relatively safer, they are not without risks. Anti-American sentiment can sometimes lead to hostility, and travelers are advised to maintain a low profile. The U.S. Embassy in Islamabad provides limited consular assistance, but the overall security situation makes Pakistan a difficult place for Americans to visit. For those considering travel to Pakistan, thorough research and heightened caution are essential. However, for most Americans, Pakistan remains a country to approach with care in 2025. At number 4, we have Russia, a country that has seen its relationship with the United States deteriorate significantly in recent years. Political tensions, sanctions, and accusations of interference in domestic affairs have created a frosty atmosphere between the two nations. In 2025, Russia remains unwelcoming to Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, warning against all travel to the country. The risks for Americans include arbitrary detention, harassment, and the potential for being caught in the middle of geopolitical disputes. High-profile cases of Americans being detained on questionable charges have further heightened concerns. Additionally, the Russian government has imposed restrictions on U.S. citizens, including limiting the issuance of visas and closely monitoring their activities within the country. The lack of diplomatic support, combined with the unpredictable political climate, makes Russia a high-risk destination for Americans. Even for those with personal or professional reasons to visit, the risks are significant. For Americans, Russia remains a country to approach with extreme caution in 2025. At number 3, we have China, a global superpower with which the United States has a complex and often tense relationship. Trade wars, technological competition, and political disagreements have strained ties between the two nations in recent years. In 2025, China remains a challenging destination for Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 3 travel advisory, urging Americans to reconsider travel to the country. The risks for U.S. citizens include arbitrary detention, espionage accusations, and restricted access to consular assistance. High-profile cases of Americans being detained on vague charges have raised concerns about the safety of U.S. travelers in China. Additionally, the Chinese government closely monitors the activities of foreigners, and Americans may face heightened scrutiny. The lack of transparency in the legal system and the potential for being caught in the middle of geopolitical tensions make China a high-risk destination. For those considering travel to China, thorough research and heightened caution are essential. However, for most Americans, China remains a country to approach with care in 2025. At number 2, we have Cuba, a country with a long and complicated history with the United States. Despite periods of thawing relations, political tensions and U.S. sanctions have made Cuba a challenging destination for Americans. In 2025, Cuba remains unwelcoming to Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 2 travel advisory, urging Americans to exercise increased caution when traveling to the country. The risks for U.S. citizens include restrictions on travel, limited access to consular assistance, and potential harassment by Cuban authorities. The U.S. embargo on Cuba, which has been in place for decades, limits the ability of Americans to engage in certain activities, such as staying in government-owned hotels or conducting business with Cuban entities. Additionally, the Cuban government closely monitors the activities of foreigners, and Americans may face heightened scrutiny. For those considering travel to Cuba, thorough research and adherence to U.S. regulations are essential. However, for most Americans, Cuba remains a country to approach with caution in 2025. Finally, at number 1, we return to North Korea, a country that remains one of the most isolated and restrictive nations in the world. The relationship between North Korea and the United States has been marked by decades of hostility, nuclear tensions, and a lack of diplomatic engagement. In 2025, North Korea continues to be the most unwelcoming country for Americans. The U.S. State Department has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, strongly advising against all travel to the country. The risks for Americans include arbitrary detention, long-term imprisonment, and the inability of the U.S. government to provide consular assistance. The case of Otto Warmbier, a U.S. student who was detained in North Korea and later died after being released in a coma, serves as a stark reminder of the dangers Americans face in the country. The lack of diplomatic relations and the unpredictable nature of the North Korean regime make it one of the most dangerous destinations for U.S. citizens. For Americans, visiting North Korea is not just discouraged, it's practically impossible. The country's strict control over information, its surveillance of foreigners, and its hostile political climate make it the most unwelcoming place for U.S. travelers in 2025. And there you have it, 15 countries where Americans are not welcome in 2025. From political tensions and security risks to outright bans and travel restrictions, these destinations present significant challenges for U.S. citizens. While the world is full of incredible places to explore, it's important to stay informed about the risks and realities of traveling to certain countries. Always check the latest travel advisories and plan your trips carefully to ensure your safety. If you found this video informative, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. For more thought-provoking content like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.